It's a beautiful message because it looks directly at our experience. And the message isn't unique or personal, really, of non duality. It's really just what it says. Non would mean not, and duality or dual would mean two. So it's essentially just looking at the two-ness of what. It's looking at the two-ness of our situation, yeah? So as you sit here or wherever you are and you look at around you, there's seemingly a lot of objects. Yes, so there's walls and there's a computer and there's tea and there's all kinds of objects. This immediately puts you into a situation of two because if there's objects, then there's a subject, yes? Otherwise there couldn't be objects. Yeah. So non-duality is essentially saying not to. So everything that pops up in the experience of two-ness, um, you would negate or meet with something called self-inquiry. And by negating, we don't mean like denying that something is arising. Yeah, there's an arising of a subject-object experience all the time, but we're negating it as our true nature or as the basis of what we are. Uh, So when there's a object like a thing of tea, there's a subject seeing that object. Yeah, that would present a thing of two-ness. So we would meet that with self-inquiry, like who is that who is that tea arising to, or who is the thought arising to? It's very obvious in like the relationship between the body and the world. Yeah, but now the message of non-duality is you're not the body. So there's dualities popping up in your experience internally all the time. For instance, uh, there's a thought that comes up, and then there's a feeling that you see that thought. So that again puts you into a subject-object relationship. Now, the message of non-duality says the subject that's claiming to see that thought is a false subject. It's an appearance, but there's nothing actually there. So what we become identified as the seer of thought or the subject of all these objects is a misidentification in many ways, yes? So this is really what the message of not to looks at. Good? Cool. Erwin, I'll look at your questions here in a minute. Um, so really, it's just negating everything that's popping up as two-ness. Because in, let's say, Buddhism or Hinduism or yoga or Advaita Vedanta, um, that would be the key of suffering, would be separation. And the first separation would be subject object, yeah. So this is really what this message is looking at. And it's really, it is looking at that root of separation, subject and object. Because non-duality or Advaita or Chan or whatever would say that essentially wholeness is your true nature and you are that already. Yeah, so that's like done in a way. Wholeness is there, but when you hear that, there's a seeming feeling that that ain't the case. That the wholeness is being fragmented or broken into parts somehow. That's the psychological system doing that. Yeah, it's breaking down wholeness into different sections or fragmenting it. So whether that happens from things that happen at childhood, or whether that happens simply because the senses are seeing things and it's making a seer and then a seen, yeah, it's just breaking of experience. And that's happening to everyone, so it's not a personal message in that way. It creates separation, which is the root of the suffering, yeah. So rather than altering or looking at the objects, we're looking at the subjectivity, essentially what I'm taking myself to be, and questioning that. Now, from the world, coming from the world of addiction, this is very important because I lived an insane from an insane mindset for I don't know, let's say 30 years, yeah. Um, but it never seemed insane to me. My head never seemed insane. It seemed just like what it was, like the norm, let's say, yeah. So the mental system is always presenting interpretations. Now, mental system, any interpretation is going to be a misinterpretation because it's misinterpreting the direct experience of what's happening. Yeah. So for 30 years, I lived as whatever the head would say. So whatever thought or interpretation of a situation would come up, no matter how insane it was, I took that to be mine. So it didn't matter how crazy the presentation that the mental system was making was, uh, it was taken to be mine, yeah? And in doing so, it was reacted to. Or the mental presentation or interpretation or perception of what was happening was reacted to in that way because I'm taking it to be mine. So the head comes up, the thought comes up with an idea, I see it, yeah? There's a seeing of it, let's say. And then right away, the head claims that it's my thought. So whatever the thought system is saying, uh, I'm essentially going with. Yeah. That movement was coming up. I mean, thoughts are happening constantly for most people. Yeah, so it doesn't. The thing is when your thoughts come up, there's nothing to challenge that those thoughts are right or wrong, yeah, because it's your interpretation. So you're bound to it in a way if you don't hear anything else, you see? Like a message like this, like you're not those thoughts or you're not the thinker of those thoughts. So for 30 years, it was just like this. The thinking was insane. The interpretations and perceptions were insane. And that makes things very, very uncomfortable to live under that insanity. It wasn't until I went into recovery that I started to see how insane they were. So, like depression or like constant suicidal thoughts, let's say, or yeah, like depressive thoughts, tons of anxiety. It doesn't seem to be insane until you go into a thing like AA because I'm drinking obviously to get away from that discomfort. And then they go, "Oh, yeah, that's insane thinking." Yeah. It's like take somebody else almost to tell the head. Because otherwise the head is just playing to me and I'm taking it to be me. So when you're identified with it, you're not questioning it because it seems to be you. And then I went into recovery and they said, well, self is defeating you. And self, small s self, like individuality, is what's defeating you. Well, how could self be defeating me if I am self? Yeah. That wouldn't even make sense. Self is defeating you. Well, self must be something and I must be something. So the mental system is beating me sometimes, somehow. It was through my identification with it, yeah, as the thinker of those thoughts. And that, man, that brings such a relief or gap between the from the thinking, yeah. Because the head is presenting all kinds of wild ideas for everybody all the time, and life gets very confusing. Uh, and it really is like it's such a relief to have a break from those thoughts by seeing that you're not the thinker of those thoughts. Yeah. Mm. Because this is the thing, if you think if you're taking yourself to be the thoughts, then it's really the thoughts that are driving you. Yeah? You're not having thoughts. Thoughts are having you because you're not doing the thinking. Thinking is like a programmed mechanical thing. It's just a response that's coming, from what's happened in the past. So if you don't see that you're not the thoughts, you're seeing from the thoughts or the interpretation of the head. So whatever your your mental system sells you, you're seeing the world through that interpretation. Yeah. The thing is, when you hear a message like this, when thoughts come up, you're not the thoughts, and then you're not the seer of the thoughts. You see the thoughts, but you see them from before them. So you're not seeing from them. You're seeing them actually. Yeah, you're seeing how they arise, and that exposes a lot to you about how your thoughts or self, as they would say in a small s self, has been misleading you. Yeah. So this is really looking at the seer of the thoughts. It's looking at the subject or the proposed subject to all the objects. Because when a thought comes up, the thing is, your head, the mental system claims that thought and then says right away that it's your thought, that there's a you there who's thinking that thought. Yeah. So this isn't so much looking at the object, which here would be the thought. It's the idea of being the one it's arising to, or the thinker. That's where the relief is from. Yeah. It's from like you have to step back again before the thought, let's say, and see who's that thought arising from, or who's it arising to. Mm. And then the relief comes from that, to see that you're not the thinker of the thoughts. So, because thought and thinker would present a two. That's a two-ness, yeah? And this is saying not to. So this approach really is a negation. You're not trying to change your thoughts or better your thoughts or anything. It's a negation of the mental, in a way. And it's by negating, seeing, okay, I'm not that, my true nature is not that, it's not that, yeah? Because the mental system would be a relative truth. Like, in the world, there's a relative truth called you, yeah? But the absolute would be before the idea of you. The thing is, the sense of self or the relative individual is taking itself to be the absolute. You're not doing that. Your head is essentially selling its perceptions and then interpretations as the absolute truth. Yeah. And if you're identified with the head, you're going to go with that absolute truth. Yeah. My mental system is very sure that its thoughts and ideas are the absolute truth. It's very convinced that it is right, essentially, yeah? And one of the benefits of alcoholism is that it gets so uncomfortably wrong that you end up turning and looking at it. So this is like non-duality, yeah? Mm. It's that movement of negation. Erwin asked a question here. World understands female abuse. Yeah. You know what I would say to that, uh, talking from that is that you can only, like it's a Course of Miracles would say, you can only see the past, yeah? So when adverse things happen to you when you are a young child, you essentially see through that lens. That's what I would say. This is just my experience. I'm not a psychotherapist. I do embodiment therapy, but I'm not like a psychiatrist or something. But I noticed in my own experience that my mental system is warped. It interprets and sees things and perceives things and often creates total situations which aren't happening yet. When the Course of Miracles says you only see the past, you and I only see the past, I can really relate to that because the head is only seeing what's happening from its past programming. So in my experience with abuse as a young child, I take everything to be my fault is one of the big ones. That's like we could say a core belief of the head. But it's really interesting to see that because if you know that, then you can see current events happening as you move through the day or move through life. And I can see the head put that label on it, that it's my fault, yeah? It doesn't matter how off that might be. The world understands female abuse. Yeah. Abuse affects people. The thing about the past, about trauma or whatever, is it's subjective. So it's this experience that we're in as a body and as an individual, yeah, is a subjective experience. So the head is subjective, is putting itself as the subject of whatever happens. Um, So to say things are one way and not the other is really hard for a certain group of people or different for a group of, because it's subjective. I met people in recovery who have been through the same stuff as I have, and it's had a very adverse, different effects on them than mine. Um, yeah. Mm. That's I don't yeah, because this talk is really about not two. It's not so much about what has happened to the individual. It's to see that what has happened to the individual. This is why this message has given me so much relief, is because the head is programmed from events that happened when I was young. It interprets everything off key, let's say, yeah? It's misinterpreting everything. The thing is, I haven't experienced that I'm going to change that interpretation to the point where it's not going to arise and cause me a bunch of suffering. So, this not to message is not trying to change the head. It's not trying to change the nervous system or switch the thinking to non judgmental thinking. It's seeing that what is arising in the mental system is not mine. I'm not doing it and I'm not being done to by it. And that's the relief. And then what happens to the mental system is it morphs in a way, in my experience. The head changes not by me changing it, but by losing faith in it. Because if I'm putting faith into the system which is misinterpreting life, I'm going to live a very misinterpreted life. I'm going to live essentially viewing from the past. And I know that from my experience. And that will make things very uncomfortable and I'll want to drink, yeah? But if thoughts or ideas, memories, whatever's coming up, is met with the understanding that I'm not the thinker of those thoughts, I don't feed those thought systems because they're misinterpretations. Yeah? So it doesn't matter in my experience. This message of not to is not personal. It's not based on what you're identified as or this and this and this as a body. Yeah? It's the question of who that body arises to. Mm. I'm not. I used to be interested in trying to inform people about abuse and trauma, and just from my own experience, I'm much more interested in talking about how to get relief from those things because the events are subjective. So the head is taking the event and it's morphing it its own way, and that's going to change for each person. So for me to try to educate people about abuse would be just one perspective of abuse, which is very limiting. Yeah. A lot of people have the same maybe thought patterns or they have the similar ideas or reactions or whatever. But at this point, I'm only interested in relief. That's my only interest. Sometimes when I give these talks, people will try to dispute or something non-dual, not to philosophy, and I have no interest in it. These talks are based on what has helped me the most, yeah, which is why I share personal experience a lot. Um, and you just mentioned the world understands female abuse. I would highly disagree with that. If you look at the world and their reactions to female abuse, it's extremely skewed. Uh, it's yeah. I wish the world understood female abuse, or any abuse for that matter. Yeah. But this is the thing; it becomes subjective. Whatever happens in the person's life is a subjective experience, and there's nothing wrong with that. The thing is I see this in the yoga world where they try to group people into these groups of traumatic experience, but every experience is subjective to that person. So it's taken a different way and it's developed a different way. And this is why I like this message of not to has hit me because I tried to morph the mental system into like a better one or a spiritual one or something, and it didn't work because these are habit patterns, yeah? In my experience from childhood stuff, those habit patterns are super strong, man, and they just keep going, especially if I'm taking them to be my habit patterns. Because then I try to get out of the idea that I feel less than or everything's my fault. And I'm not doing that. It's a habit of the head. So when something happens in life, my head immediately goes, that's my fault. And then the next claiming that happens almost instantly is that thought, it's your fault, is to you. There's a you there that is having that thought. And then I'm bound to the thought. Yeah? It's important to see that the thinking, you're not doing the thinking. The thinking is a habit pattern. It's reactive. You can see it. This is not like far beyond you or whatever you can see your head habit patterns think. Something happens, the head goes right to like it's 5 old tricks, yeah? Great. No problem with that. That's just what's happening. There's a great book called Who Cares by Ramesh Balsekar who talks about that aspect of Advaita. Yeah. So, because you're not the doer of the thoughts, which means you're not the done to of the thoughts either. Yeah. There's no self. We have to remember that. This is all just mental movement suggesting that it's happening to you, which in this case, in our cases, would be a body. It's happening to Jay, the body. Yeah. But there's this sense of being the one that everything's happening to, and that's the sense that this message is looking at. It's negating that sense. When the head comes up and said it's happening to me, what happened to me when I was young? It happened to who? Me. Yeah? Good. Who was done to? Me. Who's the doer of all the reactive processes that come from what happened from when you were young? Me. So now when the head has a habit reaction of something, it immediately gets put on me, like I'm doing that, yeah? And then what? I have to undo it. Who's going to undo it? Me. It just comes back to the me constantly. This is why this message is so good, because it looks right at the me. Who am I? Is that a thing inside the body? Is there a me there, or is it another idea which is moving and changing all the time? The me, the idea of you is changing constantly. Yes? And then we wonder why we might have anxiety. Because the idea of you is changing. It's this one moment, and then it's this. I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm up, I'm down. But. This is duality. Left, right, good, bad, husband, wife, partner, dog, up, blah. Yeah? It's not about trying to change the duality. It's that all of those movements, happy, sad, good, bad, abused, not abused, is arising to something. Is that something you? Or is it an idea which is suggesting that there's a you there, yet there's no you? Yeah? There is no individual. This is the thing. And then that's the relief from what's arising. And then what happens when it arises? It's still no you who's there. You've seen it. You've seen behind it, yeah? This is the thing. My experience is that my head still tries to sell some of the same products because it's a habit pattern. Yes? Except it's been seen, essentially. When it arises, who's it arising to? That me is not there. It's an idea. It's a thought. And then what's before it is what you end up finding out, yeah? When you negate the idea of you. And you negate that inside the body, which, by the way, I did a little mini course thing. I'm just waiting for Insight Timer to put it up. But it's how to settle the system and inquire inside the body into that me-ness. So this is why I don't really talk about my own experience of abuse so much, because it's a subjective experience. And I know my head is interpreting it and misinterpreting it. What I can tell you is stuff happened to me when I was a young kid. My head, this head, sees the world through certain core beliefs that were programmed from those events. Still, at the age of 36. Yes? If I'm taking myself to be that thinking, I am now the slave to those thoughts. And it doesn't matter how insane those thoughts are. If they're taken to be my thoughts, they're take the body. They're going to move the body in the direction of those thoughts. It doesn't matter how insane, because Your thoughts is the only radio station playing. There's no other station up here, yeah? So it would be really good to know that those aren't your thoughts. That you are what you're looking for, yeah? Otherwise you're seeing from the thinking. You're seeing from the reactive process. You're not seeing it. Which is why when you negate it, you really see how it unfolds. And as Ramana said, you will laugh. And you will laugh because the head is misinterpreting what's happening constantly. And it gets quite funny in a way. Yeah. In my experience, abuse is heavily misunderstood still, as is addiction. I was just talking to somebody yesterday who reached out about somebody they thought was an addict, yeah, or an alcoholic. And, alcoholism is something that's realized or self identified. Yet I've had a lot of people talk to me about family members who they think are alcoholics. Yeah. I've noticed like this head doesn't know, it doesn't really know anything. It interprets a lot and perceives a lot of stuff, but it doesn't really know, yeah? And it misinterprets and puts a lot of labels on things that aren't going on. But I've noticed that a lot in the last couple years. Where people, oh, this person's an alcoholic. But alcoholism, even in AA, is a self-identified thing. Yeah, you talk to other people who are around. You identify with those people in the literature, and then somebody realizes on their own that they're the alcoholic. And it's very misunderstood still now, And yeah, these are all. It's good to talk about these things because you can see how the head misinterprets stuff. And that's important to see, not to change it, but to see that you're not doing it and that you can negate that mental movement. So if there's any other questions or something, please write in the chat thing there and it'll move the conversation along. I don't know if any of that made sense, Helen. Yeah. Uh, mm-hmm. Or Erwin, I'm not sure if that made sense, but this is just how I've seen this thing unfold in the head. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, maybe we'll go to a reading or something here. This is a cool book by Kempo Tsaltrim Gyamtso Rinpoche. He's a Tibetan teacher. Wrote this book called The Progressive Stages of Meditation on Emptiness. We're going to look at two really short sentences here. So the first one, he says, if one had no independent existence, there would be no one to claim the actions and experience as its own. So if one had no independent existence, which is the primary argument of Buddhism, yeah, there is no self, or at least certain Buddhist schools, the ones I know of. If one had no independent existence, so independent, permanent existence, there would be no one to claim the actions and experience as its own. So if there is no self, which is the belief of that, there is no thing which is a permanent individual existence. Yeah, everything would be interdependent, we could say, on everything else, including your thoughts, which are programmed from the past, and your feelings and your ideas, your emotions. The body obviously is not existing, because if the brain dies, the body just falls over. Yeah, that's good. I just gotta find that one more time now. Then he says, if one had no independent existence, there would be no one to claim the actions and experiences as its own. This puts into a big light what is claiming your actions and experiences. When there's an action that takes place or you do something, what is claiming I did that action? That's the mental system, you see. The mental system is saying I did that. I did it. So the head is taking an action, whatever the action that is, giving a talk or whatever, and it's saying, I did that. Yeah. That is a perfect example of the head claiming the actions and experiences of its own. So what happened to me today, it happened to me. Yeah. And then I had a bunch of actions. The common denominator there is the me. Yeah, it's the I. This is a good thing to read because your head, everybody's head, is claiming everything. And actually, the idea of us, the idea of you and me, comes after the action. And you can see that happen as well. When you see something, there's a seeing that takes place. Yes? And then your head comes in, identifies what it's seeing, and claims that you're the seer of that thing. Now, that idea then disappears until the next moment happens. Then you hear something. It's your head says car, and it puts you right there as the hearer of the car. It comes right back to the I all the time. So if one had no independent existence, so meaning there's nothing inside of the body which has an independent existence, then there would be no one to claim the actions and experiences as its own. Yet something is claiming your life. Something is claiming everything in your life. Yes? That would be the mental system. You see something, the head is claiming that seeing and saying you're the seer. But they're saying that there is no self. So who is the you? Would be an idea, yes? Mm-hmm. And then he says, we all act as if we had a permanent, single, and independent self, that it is our constant preoccupation to protect and foster. That's amazing. We all act as if we had a permanent, single, and independent self, and that it is our constant preoccupation to protect and foster. So what is trying to protect itself is the sense of I, yeah? Now, non-duality would essentially say, there you go. One of the best ways to see duality is if I say, whose body is that? You say it's my body. Yeah, which would put you in a place of ownership of the body. So if there's a my and then there's a body, that puts you in a position of two. Yeah. So right away, the sense of what we are individually is split. That would, right away, it just proves that there's not an independent existence. It's split already. the head fragments the experience immediately. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just what the head does. That's how the operation moves. It's working through a system of two-ness. This is the thing, you see. That two-ness would be the root of suffering. So non-duality would be negating that two-ness, not denying it or trying to destroy it. It doesn't really exist. It arises and then goes, but it, yeah. So it is our constant preoccupation to protect and foster the individual. Yet the text is saying there is no individual, yeah? So it's important to see, well, what is trying to protect and foster the body then, yeah? This is the head. And most of the time it's trying to overprotect and over-foster the body. Oh. And that would be great to see because there's a lot of weight living as an individual self. There's no weight living as what's aware of that, or the space the clouds move through, let's say. That's not a big weight, you see. That's really the drop of relief. That to see what is trying to protect the body and foster the body is not you. And then let it go on. It goes on and on and on, after this. But it's not arising to you, which is very important. Yeah. So if one had no independent existence, which is the argument of the Buddhism here, There would be no one to claim the actions and experience as its own. Yet actions and experiences are being claimed to be happening to you. Ah. So something is doing that which obviously isn't you, yeah? That would be the head. Wow. Okay, I think so. I got some questions here. What I'm after is awareness. You have a platform. Yeah. What an opportunity. Mm. Ah, yeah, I see. Okay. This is definitely not group counseling, Erwin. This is a look at one message from my own experience because it's given me a lot of relief, yeah? This is not, these talks are not about changing the individual. As we just read in this text, there is no individual. Yeah, that would be a fact of non duality. That's an important fact. Counseling is to alter, or what do they say in psychology, make better the psychological system or improve the psychological system. This is looking at the psychological system not to improve it, but only to negate it. Only to see that it's a system of two-ness that gets negated, yeah? Awareness, maybe, sure, yeah. If people get awareness from this, then that's great. But they are awareness, so I would rather them become aware of what they're not, which would be the mental system which is arising. Huh? So, yeah, as this text says, we all act as if there's a permanent, single, and independent self, and that becomes our preoccupation to protect and foster. Now, my experience from having a young child who's had stuff happen to me, there's a huge self-centered over preoccupation with protecting and fostering the body. That would be a misinterpretation, like I was talking about earlier. If I'm that would make me completely obsessed with protecting the body. Yes? That obsession adds tons of weight to my life. If I'm under the guise of that obsession, then that adds tons of weight to my life. This is the thing. This is not about changing the obsession. Because in my experience, I'm not going to change the mental obsession. I'm going to lose faith in it and see that it's not me doing it and it's not arising to me. And in that, it will be changed by something higher than myself, just like AA. Yeah? Counseling would be looking at changing the mental system or bettering the mental system. That is not the movement of non duality in my experience. It is seeing all its different faces in order to see it and then negate it. And when it's negated, there you are as what you've always been, awareness or Buddha nature or whatever, absolute thing, whatever name we put on it's going to distort it. That's it. The rest is done by losing faith in that individual movement. Because there is a sense of individuality. There's a sense of independent existence. But just like this Rinpoche is saying, there is no independent existence, yes? There's something claiming your actions and experiences to be your own. And it's not you. That's what it's saying. This is the beauty behind this thing. When my head is spewing out all kinds of false information, I don't go to try to change it. I just know it ain't me. That's it. And then it doesn't turn into years of stories and resentments. It just dies. Because it comes and goes. It only stays alive as long as we put fuel on the fire of the mental system. Thoughts are like super fast, you know? But they end up in a form of repetition if you're tied to them as the thinker of those thoughts. And then as soon as you try to stop the thinking, oh, that binds you double to the thinking. Yeah? If you want thoughts to settle down, then see that you're not the thinker of those thoughts. Leave the thoughts alone. Yeah? See that you're not the thinker and negate that. Investigate to see if there's something inside of your body which is called J, and there's nothing there in my experience. That's why we're here talking about this, because it's had such an influence on the character of Jay that man, it's lifted all that weight, that it's like incredible. It's like amazing. I never thought that there could be as much peace or relief as there is. My head could not fathom that amount of peace or relief. Ever. 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 It's never going to get therapied or counseled into a point where it could be peaceful, because the mental system is anxious mental system. It's constantly moving. Doesn't mean it's moving about terrible ideas, but it's constantly jumping. It's not going to solidify as a solution. And that word solution, I feel, is very important. Yeah. To see that there is no individual is a real solution, because it's a fact. When it's investigated enough, it's a fact. There's nothing that's going to unconvince me of that fact. It can't be done. It's too convincing. Yeah? Uh, I forget what I was saying there, but yeah. I've tried the tactic of trying to alter the individual constantly, but the individuality is always changing. So to try to move my thoughts and my ideas around and make them perfect wouldn't make sense, because it's just going to change. So it doesn't come to a solution. It's like in AA, the solution is not to rehab self. It's losing faith in self, putting it in a higher power. That is the solution. And there is a solution. Now for an alcoholic, I had no concept that there was a solution ever. I thought it was just the way it was going to be, and that was it, right until I drank myself to death. But this is not the case. There is a solution for the alcoholic. It's losing faith in self. And non-duality is simply saying there is no self. So even what's trying to lose faith in self would be self. So you can lose faith in that too. And then when the head presents all of its amazing misinterpretations, there's not a grasping onto them, because you just see that you're not the thinker of those ideas, including the idea of me. As soon as that movement moves through, anything that started with I is completely, it's just not bought, because there is no I. So it's just another thought. It's like a constant stream that's going on, yeah? That we end up feeding through our identification with it. Now, in my experience, from crazy stuff that happened in my childhood, that mental movement is turned up, and the self-centeredness knob is turned way up. So now all the thoughts are about me. It's like Wei Wu Wei said, 99% of your thoughts are about you that doesn't exist, but there's way more of them, and they're hyper vigilant. Yeah. So I tried to turn down that system by messing with the mental system, and it didn't work. It didn't work. It was just more effort and wait to try to solidify something that can't be solidified. And that is the thing is I was trying to change what can't be changed. The idea of self-help in a way is very ironic, because from the view of non-duality, in my experience, individual self cannot be helped. It can be helped a certain amount. But the thing is, it can't get out of itself. And being bound to self is the problem in Alcoholics Anonymous. Ooh. Forgiveness. It's reinterpretation of the original negative message. I'm not sure what the negative message means, unless you're talking about negation. Yeah? It's forgiving the people who acted to plant negativism. Okay. I will talk about that, because I do have experience with forgiveness. The thing is, the mental system which was abused, I've had experience with this one. That mental system, let's say Jay, the individual, cannot truly forgive the people that messed with Jay. I know that from my own experience. That my head can say, I forgive. But as long as Jay is identified with the body, which it is, yeah, to forgive something that somebody did something to the body is kaput. There will always be a resentment left in J. The thing is if you negate, if you see that there's no individual, it is not personal. It's not a personal fact. It means there is no individual anywhere. Yeah? It means that the sense of I or doership isn't sitting in really in any body. There's a sense of individuality. We would call that the relative truth in Buddhist thought, yes? There's a relative existence, but it's not the absolute truth. The relative existence is not going to be able to forgive somebody for something that happened to it. Not to the point where it's going to give relief. It's only when you see, well, if there's no individual here, yes, if there's no individual here, then whatever that person is doing, they're not doing it. They're being done, something is getting done through them. And if you only see the past, then things that people do is probably stuff was done to them. Yeah? That to me is the door of forgiveness. And I know I've done a bunch of terrible stuff to people when I was drinking, yeah? So I'm not exempt from this doing bad stuff. Or doing stuff that's not so kosher. Yeah? This is the key. Is that the person who's doing that was driven to do that by the mental system. Okay. That's very important, because I notice that I can't forgive just from the knowledge of individuality. My head won't let it go. But if you can see that there's what people are doing is happening through them, the same way that things are happening through this thing, then it gets a lot clearer, because the actor and the action can be righted, the view can be righted, and that's to me very important. Yeah. So when I look at forgiveness, I look at it from the Buddhist sense that there's no doer. People are being done through. Yes, and that is very important, because if they're the doer and I'm the done to is not going to forgive the doer. Not in the point of for the alcoholic where they really need to put that down. Because if they don't actually forgive and have that feeling of forgiveness, it has to be understood that people are under the influence of the mental system, and that mental system is programmed. Then you can forgive, yeah. Because you see that the actor and the action, it's like cleared up in a way. Things are coming through people. However good or bad those things are, there is no doer thereof. And that opens the door for forgiveness. That's my own experience. I'm never going to train my brain to forgive people who have done terrible things. It has to come with the backing. It has to come with the backing of that understanding that people are being done through, not so much from. Yeah, to see that there is no real individual subject who is doing. It's like a programmed response, let's say. And you see that a lot in AA with the way people share. They share a lot of the same things. So you just see like AA is beautiful because you go there and everybody has the same, let's say, issue that they're kind of working with. Alcoholism. And you instantly see that your thoughts are not unique. So everybody's being done to in a way, or done through. And that's like really good to see, because it removes what they call that terminal uniqueness of the alcoholic. Yeah. So if there's any questions or something about the message of not to, it's a good thing to bring up forgiveness, because I've tried both techniques and the first one doesn't work. The courses on forgiveness, the ideas about how I'm going to forgive, without the understanding of non-duality, forgiveness is very, very difficult. It's like my head can't let those things go cognitively. It has to come from the understanding that people are being done through. Maybe it works for other people, but I think for the alcoholic who needs to put stuff down indefinitely as a solution, as not, yeah, that's, I guess, all I could really say. That's my interest is in solutions. Non-duality to me is a solution. It's not trying to counsel or psychotherapy the self. It's seeing that there is no self. So when things arise, the solution is that there is no problem, as Paul Hederman would say. Yeah. And so this is the thing. Otherwise, I'm trying to constantly get out of something that I'm not in, which is reifying my inness. And that will go on indefinitely. Because the head is always presenting things to get out of or get into, and there's no peace in that. That's not a solution to me. So if there's any questions, please ask about the not to or. It ties into recovery because in recovery the word self, small s self, would speak to individuality or the sense of the individual. And the main message of recovery is that self is what has defeated you. Yeah. So what you're identified as in recovery, what I'm identified as when I go into recovery is what's defeating me. And it's defeating me through my identification with it. So when the head presents a thought, there's a sense that I'm the thinker of that thought, and now I'm bound to the thought. And there's a lot of suffering in recovery, obviously. So it would be very important to see the solution right away, that you are not self. That self is like a programmed mechanism. The thoughts are a habit pattern, essentially. And they're just reacting as they always would. So in recovery, you lose faith in that habit pattern. You put it right into a higher power immediately, pretty much as soon as you go into the program. And then you take that higher power to go through the steps to see why the head is programmed the way it is. And then you make amends for what you did so those things don't come bite you in the butt later. And then on you go. Yeah. That would be the program as a solution. Faith in the higher power rather than in the individual. The idea of small s self. Yeah. So non-duality is just essentially saying there is no self. Well, Buddhism is saying there is no self. And that everything that pops up in the form of two-ness can be negated as not your absolute nature. Relative individuality, sense of individuality is moving along for sure. As Jesus would say, you're in this world, but not of it. Yeah. So if you're in this world as a relative body, but you're not of this world in the absolute sense. You would be before all of that. Yeah. Like the sky, when the clouds move through, the clouds would be the relative, the absolute would be the space of the sky. Or it's like, yeah. It's such a solution. The understanding, yeah. You don't have to lift a ton of weight. And you don't have to really listen to much. You just, it's in our own experience right there, two-ness. The eyes see a tree, the head goes, that's a tree, and I'm the seer. You're not the tree, and you're not the sense of being the seer. Yeah. A thought comes up, there's a thought, and then there's something that goes, I'm seeing that thought, I'm the thinker. You're not the thought, and you're not the sense of what's seeing it being the thinker. That's all. Yeah. So this Rinpoche, Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso, would say that self is really an emotional attachment. Because obviously there is nothing inside of us which we could call a self. Which brings, if you look at then the recovery, what is driving the alcoholic is self. So in that sense, that's a mental movement. Only mental movement. Yeah. All of that action is presenting the idea that all the action in your life is happening to you. But the idea of you is part of the action. There's only actioning here. There's no solid, independent, permanent thing that action is happening to. You see, that negates the two-ness right there. And then you land in what you are. And always have been, by the way. Yeah. Back to the shore from which you've never left. Oh, man. It's so much relief. You know? It's not like a ton of weightlifting. It's just a misunderstanding that I was living under for life. That almost killed me, that misunderstanding. There's a lot of misunderstandings that my head has. And, oh my God. It would be really nice to be informed of those misunderstandings, which recovery and the message of not to do, yeah. The primary misunderstanding being that I am not the I that my head is putting me as. That would be a good misunderstanding to see that. Because otherwise I'm seeing through the eyes of self. And self is misinterpreting everything. And then I wonder why my life is so uncomfortable. Because what the head is saying is misinterpreting everything. Oh, man. So rather than trying to change or alter that mental system and fix it and teach it how to forgive and teach it how to be better, it's just a loss of faith in the thing. And when the faith is lost like that, man, it changes, but not by you doing something. It just changes by, it just alters by, like, in the program, they would say, put your faith in the higher power and then God will do it all. So it's, stay on the bed, get operated on, don't leave, and there you go. Bang. The thing about non-duality and this idea of no self is that it's a real fact. It's true, yeah? What the head is constantly selling me is not true. It's not true. And when you lose faith in it because you see that it's not arising to a you, what you land in is true. And it's extremely convincing. Because it's there, it's reality. As Ramana says, you are reality, yeah? Being ourselves reality. Margaret. It's so hard to get my head around. This is the best place. Okay, nice. Oh, I'm glad. Great, Margaret. If you have any questions, please ask, yeah? I'm an old lady. Well, the body's an old lady. You're not. I've been hauling this self around for a long time. This is good. A lot of people say this. It's hard to get my head around. One of the beauties of this message for me is that my head is not going to be able to grab it. Because if this is something that the mental system can grab onto, it's going to neuter it, negate it, and just misinterpret it right away. Yeah. So we're not talking to the head. We're talking about the head and around the mental system. So that you can see how the mental system is distorting it. Distorting your experience, let's say. Yeah? So when you see that your mental system is trying to grab onto this and it's getting frustrated and it's moving around and punching and stuff, it's perfect because it's exposing itself to you. It's exposing to you what you're not. Yeah? This is the thing. So the main movement of spiritual practice then is, okay, I'm going to take all of that misunderstanding and the frustration and I'm going to calm it down and solidify it, and then I'll understand. You and I will never get this message. That is the message. I'm never going to understand the message of non-duality, and that is the message. This is the beauty about it. You don't have to read 1,000 books. You just see that what pops up in your experience and you negate it because it's a system of two-ness. It's not going to end or die, and you don't want to try to kill it because it doesn't even survive in the first place. It's a coming and going. Yeah? J at best is a coming and going. As soon as I go to bed, J is gone. When I wake up, J comes back up. Yeah? After some time, it just pops back up. And then it goes, and it goes constantly all day, yeah? So that J who's trying to get this message, the head trying to grab, the head what they say in recovery, self can't get out of self, yeah? And self is never going to become a not self. Duality is going to keep arising, yeah? It's just that you see that it's not arising to you. That's the beauty of the thing. Ah. And really, the best thing that's happened to me, I feel, in my experience of this, in the body's experience, is that it's failed so much that I just lost faith in it. It's lost faith. The head is not going to figure it out. It's going to misinterpret situations. Just lost faith in it. Yeah. Thankfully, you're not the mental system. So the head that's trying to get around this message is not your absolute nature. That's a real thank God, hallelujah. Because living as the head is, at least in my experience, is wild. And it's not for me. Oh, man. Yeah. So, Margaret, if you're still there, it's beautiful to see that. It's hard to get your head around it because that head is not yours. The head can't become a not head. The head will never grab onto this message, which is beautiful because as soon as it grabs onto it, it's going to misinterpret it as you being the one who understands. Yeah. Well, it's better to see the head grappling and just inquire who is that arising to? Who is the one who's seeing that the head can't get around it? Yeah. To see that that's not there. That's the beauty of it, really. Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Wow. Any other questions? Please go ahead and ask. Hmm. I'll leave the chat open. That's funny. Old lady been hauling around self for a long time. Yeah. Not so much. Well, then maybe we'll end there for today. I did make a little mini course on. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your questions and stuff. Yeah, it's good. It's important for those to move those things along. Margaret, I see you when I'm meditating and I look around for where the thoughts are coming from. It's clear they're coming from some machine somewhere. Okay, yeah. Margaret, look up, read Who Am I or Spiritual Practice by Ramana Maharshi. Self-inquiry if you haven't, yeah? Look around for where the thoughts are coming from. It's clear they're coming from some machine somewhere, yeah? Okay, I would stick with that investigation, yeah? The inquiry would be from where does the I arise? When a thought comes up, who's it arising to? The answer is you or me, let's say. Stick with that I. Yeah, stick with the I. Don't chase the thoughts. The thoughts are misleading you. There would be second or third person chasing, yeah? Ramanas would say stick with the I. Because I know I can relate to what you're saying there. I look around for where the thoughts are coming from. So it's who is looking around for where the thoughts are coming from. Yeah? The answer would be me or I. Right? Don't leave that I. Inquire into where in your body that I arises from. Otherwise, you're looking from the sense of self. So there's thoughts, and then there's a you seeing the thoughts, yeah? That's everybody can relate to that. The thing is, people get stuck in being the one seeing the thoughts. So you inquire into the I, because it's like this thing we just read today says, it's nothing there, yeah? But the thought of that will get claimed by your head. So stick with the I. Give it a try. First time I tried him, I just couldn't quite get there. It's because there's a movement away from the sense of I. Does that make sense to you? So the idea that there's an observer is a fallacy. But There you go. There you go. Because it's an idea. Yes? And if there's an observer, that means there's observed, which puts you into duality. So the idea that there's an observer is a fallacy. It's an idea, it's a sense of self, but it doesn't prove or say that there is a self. It's a sense. Yeah, I have many senses and they're mostly incorrect. And that would be a primary one. So when a thought arises, it's not about looking at the thought. You inquire to yourself, who is that thought arising to? Me is the answer, yeah? The same way as who's making dinner? I am. Who's working? I am. Who farted? I did. There's the I is always there, yeah? I. That is the bondage of self. The I. Inquire only into the I. So who am I, or from where does that I arise? And that's stop. That's the stop. Yeah? From where does that come? You got to step back one more. Does that make sense to you, Margaret? Because otherwise you're looking from the I, trying to change everything that comes out of it. And that's what's always going to keep changing. You go back one more. Who am I? What is I? Or from where does it arise? From where inside of your body does that I arise? See if you can find a place. Is that clear, Margaret? Otherwise, write me a message on Insight, and I'll send you some Ramana stuff. But self-inquiry, it would be self-inquiry or surrender. Practice them for a long time and always wrestled with the great I. One thing about inquiry is the head will claim it and will start to use inquiry to reinforce itself. So use inquiry, and then when the next thing pops up, just hit it with you're not that. Whatever comes up in the screen, like Ramana would say, this everything's like a picture moving on a screen. Whatever comes up in a screen, know that that's not your absolute. That's not your absolute nature, yeah? So a thought comes up, who is that arising to? Me. From where does that arise? It'll give you a second, and then you'll see the head to come back in with another idea or something. Yeah? And then as Gangamira would say, stay quiet. Yeah, so don't touch that, because anything that pops up in the screen of experience, body, thoughts, ideas, emotions, is not you. That's not the absolute you, yeah? That would be coming from the sense of individuality. It gets more subtle, and in a way the head has all kinds of tricks that it's presenting to you. But do you have any other questions about that, Margaret, or anybody for that matter? If you have them, you can inquire into who has the question and then ask the question. Yeah. The head loves to go off from that sense of individuality into the contents of this and that, yeah. And the other thing I would mention, Margaret, is downward in the body. Downward in the body. I recorded a course, but I'm waiting for these people to put it up. Once that pops up, do that little exercise over and over and over again, so that you're inside the body, settled inside the whole thing. So when you're inquiring, your habit patterns of the head aren't pulling you outside of yourself. That's very common. People inquire out here, or they inquire up here. But it's the body. Dwight is saying you're not the body. Yeah? And Dwight is saying you're not the body, so you have to inquire into the body. Consciousness pervades the body. You can't let go from the surface of yourself. Otherwise, you are always still going to be there. Your mental system wants to be there when your non-existence is exposed. Yeah. When awareness pops up, your head goes, "Oh, I got that. I get it." Yeah. See that. Yeah. Stay settled downward. And just keep, yeah, releasing your grip on that movement. That's good, Margaret. I hope that helps, man. And yeah, please follow up. Send a message in through Insight anytime if you need, because I know the trickery of this of that the mental in that way. Negation is a really good way to look at it too. Yeah, whatever pops up in your screen ain't you. That would be the yeah, because otherwise sometimes self inquiry the head takes being the inquirer, and then you bound to that. Ah, but the inquirer has to be negated as well. So sometimes just sitting, negating, just seeing whatever pops up and negating. Yeah.